to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Laura Minero, a psychologist who, with grit and determination, has surpassed the vast obstacles posed by her undocumented status. And she is here to tell you, si se puede, my friends, si se puede. In the first part of this two-part episode, we will learn about the tortuous path Laura had to endure to pursue her education, as well as the challenges she faced growing up in the Latinx community while identifying and recognizing her sexual and gender identity. Dr. Laura helped us debunk some myths about the undocumented community in the United States and highlights the importance of diversity in the scientific fields. Dr. Laura Minero, welcome to Latinx Can.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Let me start by just giving you the biggest congratulations. You recently became a doctor. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I thought it was so fitting because we were going to be talking today. So I was like, wow, I got my degree today and we're having this conversation. So thank you.
Let's start talking a little bit about your journey here in the United States, because your story is one that's familiar to many people in the Latinx community. So why don't we start by talking a little bit about that?
Yes. So, I think, like you said, right, for many Latinx folks, not all, but for many, we come from another country, and that's very much my story here. I was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, and I really only spent 5 years there. So it was hard to feel like Mexico was ever home for me, just because I only spent the first 5 years of my life there. But I have a lot of fond memories of being there, and a lot of my family is still there. And I feel like, I think it's always really important to share like the circumstances of why somebody moves. For my parents, I'm an only child, and my parents worked, and we lived in one household with my other two aunts who were single mothers, and we lived in poverty. Even with my parents working, it wasn't enough. And my parents really, wanted a better future for me and for our family, and wanted to give us the best opportunity possible. And so my dad immigrated to the U.S. first.
And that's definitely something so important to tell. I say it from my own experience, in which I got here because I came to study, and even with all the support and resources that I had with a full-time scholarship and support from the school, it was hard to come to this country and to leave everything else that I knew as my home, my parents, my support system. And so when people think about immigrants, they never stop to think about what are the circumstances that push them to sometimes take very difficult decisions to put themselves in danger to come here.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're mentioning that, because that's certainly the case of my parents and many other people I know, right? Like, why would somebody leave their parents, their family, extended family, everything they know, the culture they love and know, the language they love and know, and leave all that behind for a place that many times gives you the message that wants nothing of you, and that's the U.S.
Yeah.
Why would somebody do that, right? And so you have to really think about the circumstances that often leads people to make that decision. And interestingly enough, right, sometimes those circumstances in a lot of Latinx countries are also caused by the United States itself. So I think that's also important to mention as we kind of talk about that complex dynamic.
Yeah, we don't live in a bubble as much as we want to believe that we do.
Another thing that I think people are not aware of is that, My parents, this was back in 1990 or around there. My parents had no other way of coming to the US other than coming undocumented.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no line for them to get in. And this was,
Right.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
And to this day, people still say that. And it wasn't possible for them to get a visa. It's really, really hard, especially in Mexico, to get a visa
Yeah.
if don't own a business or meet certain criteria.
Yeah.
And that just wasn't my parents. So the only way that they could come to the U.S. was undocumented, and I'm so thankful to my parents for making such a sacrifice. Like I said, leaving everything they knew, everything they loved, everyone they loved, just to give us a better opportunity here.
And Laura, there are many myths, I think, about the undocumented population in the United States. When you listen to the news, they think that we just benefit from social programs and that we don't contribute anything to society. Can you shed a little bit of light into how that is probably not a realistic representation of undocumented people in the US?
So, I'm really glad that you're talking about myths, because we do have a lot of data out there that shows that undocumented immigrants actually pay billions of dollars in taxes every year. And I think the data is important, but from my own lived experience of growing up here undocumented, I knew I was undocumented. There are other youths who grow up here and don't find out they're undocumented until later. And I
Mm,
knew we were, and I saw my parents struggle in so many ways, right? We lived in California and it was still hard.
yeah,
Back then, my parents, couldn't even get something as simple as a driver's license. So if they can't get a driver's
yeah,
license, how could they possibly apply for any other kind of governmental benefit? You're just not allowed. If you don't even have something as simple as
yeah,
an identification, you don't
yeah,
even qualify. And they
yeah,
never had a social, so they never got any healthcare benefits. Oftentimes, they were sick and they couldn't seek medical care.
yeah,
And I saw them just kind of aguantar,
yeah.
or endure some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I saw them file their taxes every single year.
Wow.
And, I saw that firsthand. And it is a big myth. And what I think is most important to recognize is that, right, not only are people not allowed, they don't qualify for a lot of the services that people claim that they're taking advantage of, they're actually paying into services for other people.
Yeah,
So undocumented immigrants are taxed social security benefits that they will never have access to and
yeah,
never have access to. So they're actually paying into social security for U.S. citizens, and that is often not talked about. They're
yeah,
not going to get any of those benefits. So not only are we not taking advantage, I feel like undocumented immigrants are often taken advantage of, right?
yeah,
We're seeing that even in this global pandemic that we're enduring now.
absolutely.
Many undocumented immigrants are on the front lines as
Yeah,
essential workers, and they were not given a stimulus check, right? So
right.
that's like a most recent perfect example of how undocumented immigrants do not qualify for benefits, yet are
Mm-hmm.
continuously asked to do labor in this nation.
We rely on the labor that they do to get our food, to get our services, and yet they still don't get any type of assistance, right? Even if they got COVID, could probably go and seek attention maybe, but then there's a huge burden of the medical bills that comes with it.
Yeah, many don't have, it's even the testing can be inaccessible sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
individuals. I know California is good about that, but not every state is.
Yeah,
And like you said, right, even if you could get access to some type of treatment, many people have to pay out of pocket, and people simply don't have
don't
that.
have, yeah,
And even just the psychology, right, of living in this state where you can't access any services. Sometimes even in cases of emergencies, people don't, because
yeah,
of that fear of, is someone going to report me? Is someone going to find out I'm undocumented? So oftentimes undocumented immigrants even avoid places like medical facilities.
yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing with us and for shedding light into the realities of what really these people that give us so much and do so much for the general population in the US actually have to endure. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about, because you are very open and a lot of your professional experience stems from this, is that you identified as queer. You grew up in, in a Latinx family, and we are a community that can be extremely conservative. How do you navigate that challenge growing up?
Thank you so much for asking that important question. It was definitely something that was challenging. I think it's important to think about, right, how my parents and prior generations were raised. It is true that oftentimes in Latinx families, there is a lot of homophobia and transphobia, and that is due to a lack of understanding of how sexuality and how identity develops, particularly around gender, right, and attraction. And that was definitely the case for my parents. I always say they're like the thing I'm most proud of in this world, and yet it's so difficult and so painful to navigate this. So I knew around age 14 that I was starting to have like same-sex attraction, and feeling that. But then also, even in school, honestly, it wasn't even just my parents, even people who were of different race and ethnicities.
Right.
I got bullied about being queer before I even knew I was queer.
Wow.
Like, I didn't even understand it. I was like, what is that you're talking about? Like, that doesn't resonate. Then, like I said, I started to develop these feelings. Like, I knew that I couldn't share with my parents. And I think that comes, like I said, from what they've been taught, some trauma in our family, as the only child who's also a woman, what that would mean, right? How my parents would be seen, how people would see me. It always seemed like my parents' biggest fear was, ¿qué van a decir? And that was so challenging for my parents. So for a long time, I didn't come out. I actually was already in college. I think I was wrapping up my bachelor's degree by then, and I waited until I was like 22 and came out to my parents when I was in a serious relationship. And and it was devastating to them. Even then, like waiting didn't change their reaction. I knew that their reaction, was still going to be really difficult, and that they were going to need some time with it. But it was just really, really, really hard at the time. I mean, I never thought things were going to get better. Like, that was my mentality. Like, this is like my hard thing that I'm always going to have to live with. That my parents are never going to fully love or accept me. I cannot tell you how real that felt to me. Then.
And Laura, now as a person who, not only have you learned how to deal with it from your own experience, but you have also been trained in the subject, what would be your recommendation as a professional psychologist for people who find themselves in a similar situation, and how can they cope with the situation a little more easily for them?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. It's such an important question. And I'm so grateful for my training too, because even as someone who lived through it and went through it, I like really struggled to know, well, what would be like the appropriate thing here, right? Ultimately, we want to say, right, like love yourself and like love your child and support your child. And there's still little things that we do to invalidate people that are hard. So one of the things that I would say, I think this is important for parents. So I'll share like parents and then youth, or, even adults, early adults going through this. So for parents, one of the biggest things that I've learned and that I share with the families that I work with, and this is actually evidence-based, is that whatever your child or your youth or early adult, right, shares with you, it's so important to just be open. And you may have your biases or negative reactions, to never share those with your child. Never share the negative, and to have your own space whether that's in therapy, whether that's with friends. There are professionals, therapists, psychologists that specialize in this to support you with that, but never be invalidating, unsupportive, unloving towards your child. And I would say that's like the top recommendation that you can give. So you need to catch yourself when you want to say things and hold that back and let that come out somewhere else, not in front of your child. And I want to also empathize with parents that just as much as it was a process for me, and it is for other LGBTQ individuals, parents also have their own process. And it's okay to grieve, allow yourself to have your feelings. Again, just having a space for you to have your own self-care and having looking for resources that could help you understand how to better support your child. And also knowing, I think many people didn't get taught this because of how, even sex education is taught in schools or not taught. That sexuality is on a spectrum and we all fall on a spectrum, and it might even change throughout our lives. Like our attraction to people might change throughout our lives. Not always, but it can. And that's okay. Sometimes parents want people to know, like, what are you? And like, is that how it is for the rest of your life? Sometimes we can't really answer that. So I think it's allowing and knowing that like science shows us that things change and it's on a spectrum. I think most of us have like never thought of that or had the ability to think of things that way.
Thanks for sharing that. I think it's actually very instructive. For me, it's great talking to people like you and other people that I get an opportunity to interview in the podcast, because I also get to learn a little more. I might hear something different and then I can go and look it up, So thank you so much for sharing.
Can I share briefly too, just for you or, LGBTQ individuals in general, like know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, no matter what anybody says to you. You are loved. There might be moments where people are biased or discriminatory or don't understand. Sadly, sometimes that can be our parents. Know that you are loved. Know that you matter. Know that you are worthy of all the things. And, know that it's hard when you're going through it. I know people say it gets better. And I think it does. And what helps is finding the people who do see all of you and support you for all that you are. Not just being out to be, that's a big component. And find those people, and those people become your chosen family. So know that those people are out there. There are other people out there like you, and you're not alone.
Yeah. And that applies to everything, right? No matter what situation you're in, even if you are heterosexual and you identified as a woman and you are interested in men, your personality is still different than what other people around you might be. And you just need to find the people that are like you, and there are out there. It's hard, I think, at some point also to push yourself to find other people and new ways of doing things, but it's totally worth it. It's totally worth finding those people that support you.
Yeah, that are going through similar challenges and barriers. For a long time when I lived in Central California, when I was trying to apply for college, I didn't know anyone else who was undocumented, and I felt so alone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I transferred to Cal State Bullard during my undergrad that I then met other people that were undocumented, and it just made such a big difference to know, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one in this big system.
I'm glad you bring that up, because you shared with me that you were top in your class in high school, top 15%, and you really wanted to go to college, but it was very hard for you as an undocumented person to find any financial assistance.
So I think it's important to share, for me now, this was 12 years ago. So when I was starting to actually look at where I was going to apply, that was in 2007. And we already had in-state tuition here. So I think it's important to name that context, that undocumented students in California do have more access to college. And I did because I could pay in-state tuition, whereas there's other states across the nation, so crappy, undocumented students don't have that access to in-state tuition. So I want to frame, my narrative in that context and recognize the privilege in that. So for me, I want to say, though, I have to take a step back and say, I didn't know what the heck college was. I just knew it was the next step. And I knew it was the next thing I needed to do. So I was never one of those kids that was like, I remember doing a project in 6th grade about dream colleges, and I just looked some random schools up because everybody seemed to be like, oh, UC Berkeley or this other institution, Stanford, Harvard, and I was like, I didn't even know what Ivy League meant, and I didn't even understand that seriously until I was applying to PhD programs. I did not know what any of this meant. So know that if you're there, it's okay, because I was there and now I'm here with a doctorate. So I didn't even know what was going on as I started. So one of the biggest things for me being undocumented that was helpful, not even just being Latinx, being undocumented just added this additional barrier. I was talking to my high school counselors all the time. So I was tracked into honors classes, AP classes. So I had, that access. And we got access to taking ACT, SAT, prep stuff, and not prep stuff, but more practice tests. And I remember very clear, they had us in this computer lab where we were starting to apply to colleges. And I got stopped on the second page that asked for Social Security number. I was stuck, and I remember looking around and just being like, oh crap. I didn't really know that was going to be a barrier for college until it was literally in front of me. And so I had to disclose to my counselor. And I kid you not, I spent most of my junior and senior year in my high school counselor's office crying. It was just can you try this? No, requires a Social Security number. No, requires a Social Security number. Everything that we were trying, it just wasn't working. And it was I remember feeling devastated. As a kid, I felt really, really devastated and just really helpless. But my counselors just let me cry, and then would hold me there, and then would help me think of the next solution. So they both just really picked up the phones for me. So they called the universities I wanted to apply to and asked, how do we get past the Social Security number thing? And they were the ones who were helping me. They were also helping me look for scholarships. And like you said, so I think another way that we don't take advantage of the system is that we don't get any FAFSA. We do not qualify for any federal financial aid. And in California, things recently changed with a legislation that allows you to get some in-state aid. But that didn't exist when I was going through. And so for the states where that's still the case, it was literally searching through the MALDEF scholarship booklet that they have, just looking up scholarships for undocumented students. And back then, it was nothing. Do that now, and there are resources. Forward.us is one of the people to look at. There are resources. If you just Google that now, things will come up. When I was going through it, that wasn't the case. I mean, our high school had a few scholarships that you could apply to that were local, and they required for you to be in a certain field. And I wasn't going into that field, and I still applied anyway. So the biggest advice I could give to people, if there's something that keeps you from applying to something and you're apply anyway. You will be surprised that you could actually get some things that say oh, you don't qualify because of this or that. I applied anyways and got a couple 2K scholarships that I had not expected to get because they were for nursing or something, and I guess nobody else applied. So.
That's something that we talked about on the first our first episode. My brother also went to community college here. And I told him, just apply, find any scholarship and just apply. And he would be like, oh, but I don't qualify. No, it doesn't matter. You just apply and then you see what happens afterwards. You just go for it.
That's true. And it's a little harder, like if it does ask for a SOC, what I did is ask, do you take an I-10? Now, folks that have DACA, you could apply with your SOC, but we can't indicate that we are citizens or residents. So I do want people to be careful of that. You know, we don't want you to get any kind of trouble in any way. But whenever the requirement is like something random, I don't know, like one time it was like you had to live in a certain area in California, and I was already leaving for my PhD. I applied. When I was in high school, I got this 2-year scholarship through the California Scholarship Federation. I had no idea. So it was like a college-like program that I was enrolled in, and I didn't know when I was in the program that would eventually become my key to college, that it would eventually turn into a 2-year full ride. So that's important to share. And there's a California Scholarship Federation program in your high school. Enroll to that because they have partnerships with community colleges nearby, and you could get a full ride to community college. So for me, I went the community college route because there was no way I could afford $25K a year. Even being a top student at my school, there was no way I could get a full ride. You know, I didn't have a 4.0, had like a 3.7 or something. And there wasn't access at the time. There were very few full ride scholarships then, even less that were open to undocumented.
Yeah.
I think the best tools I used were my counselors, like asking for help and then like looking for, you know, ways that you might have to alter your plans. Like I thought I was going to go into the 4-year and I started at the 2-year. And to me, that was like one of the best decisions I've made.
Yeah. Learn to be flexible. It's really important. And it's a skill that you're going to need for the rest of your life, really. First, when you're studying, then when you start working, is you need to be flexible because you might have a plan, and that's okay to have a plan and a goal, but how you get there can be creative. It doesn't really have to be one straight line. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I think there's a stigma in the U.S. that a community college education is not as good as a 4-year college or university, but the difference in the amount of money that you spend is ridiculous. And for me, it might seem like a tool to keep people from pursuing an education. Do you feel like your education was affected by going to a community college?
I think it was improved by going to community college. I feel like that's also one of the greatest myths that's out there and misconceptions about community college. I will say, I think I was fed those same messages when I was in high school, and I was really disappointed initially that I couldn't go because I had been fed, you're less than, you're not as smart if you go to community college. And being there to this day, like I met some of the most amazing, intelligent students who were my colleagues while I was there. I just had actually one of my friends that I met there also just got her PhD.
Oh, wow.
So it's so amazing. And I learned that being there, though. I was initially depressed because I think I had internalized these messages like, oh, like this means that you're not good enough and, you know, you're not intelligent enough. And then there was this added layer of like, I could have gone and I couldn't because of finances. But then being there, I was like, wow, like this has really set me up for success because like you said, I couldn't have afforded college any other way.
Yeah.
And my classes were hard. I still remember some of my classes like being really challenging. And by the time I got to Cal State Fullerton, I had taken classes that some of my classmates had never taken statistics. And I had been trained in that since community college. I had already started to learn about research since community college. And some of my friends at 4 years had no idea what that was. So I thought that was great. But I think it's so important that we deconstruct that myth, and that
Mhm.
we really challenge it, because it's so messed up. It's really messed
Yeah.
up.
And I think it does not have to do anything with how intelligent you are or your ability to even pursue a degree, because it's a system that is based on you paying for your education. So it's totally based on financial ability, not on intelligence or even hard work. For me, going through my entire education, I've been extremely privileged throughout my whole life, but I look at myself and I don't think I'm exceptionally intelligent. I'm just very disciplined and I work really hard. And so I think that for me, that has made a difference. It's not about your intelligence, whether you get into a 4-year or a 2-year college, is about how much money you can pay. And for me, that is the biggest drawback of the educational system in the United States, because it's robbing opportunities from the entire population, not just from undocumented or minorities. And an affordable education can make such a difference in your life.
Yes, I mean, I feel like that is a huge policy thing that we need to work on. The last thing I do want to say about community college too, California had this really great data that looked at the like graduation rates and how long it took for people to graduate. So
Mm-hmm.
those who started at community college actually were more likely to graduate in 4 years,
Wow.
versus people that started at a 4 year were more likely to graduate in 6 years.
Wow.
Again, it's just a way to like uplift community colleges, because I think that we downgrade them so much and don't really value how they really are a great stepping stone, right, for individuals trying to pursue a higher education.
Absolutely. And so you then transfer into the University of California, no, California State University at Fullerton, right? And then you continue your education in psychology and even started to do or continue to do research. Tell us a little bit more about your transition and then how you develop that interest for research.
Oh my goodness. So as I mentioned, like in community college, I had this professor who like started to let me know a little bit about research, and I learned about statistics, and so that was already like something brewing. But honestly, in the field of psychology, as I was taking courses, a lot of it was so cognitive. It's important, but the way that a lot of the sciences and psychology are studied then was using a lot of like laboratory rats, and there's always this analogy
Mm-hmm.
like even the rats were white. That was the feeling that I had, that it was a very white field, and I wasn't really interested in doing research in psychology then, because I just didn't get it. I didn't see me reflected in it. I didn't see the purpose. So I think it's really important to name that, because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see me reflected in the science that I was learning about. That changed when I had I knew that I had to do research to go get a master's and eventually a PhD. So I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. I couldn't even qualify for McNair's. Like I couldn't do a lot of programs because I was undocumented.
Mm-hmm.
Dean put me in contact with a friend who, she's my friend now. She's a student who was doing a study, a needs assessment for undocumented students at Cal State Fullerton. He was studying whether or not the university was effectively servicing and serving the needs of undocumented students at Cal State Fullerton. And I was like, is this real? Like, people do research on this? Like, you do research on the experiences of undocumented people? Like, where have I been? That
Yeah.
just was not what I had been introduced to yet in my own field. And so that really changed everything for me. And her name is Jacqueline. She's now in a doctorate program now, too. So she just really taught me about conducting like rigorous ethical research. And this is
Mm-hmm.
another student, like this is
Yeah.
what's like so amazing about all of this. I feel like she was bringing something new even to the research center that she,
Yeah.
because her experience was that she was the only US citizen out of 5 siblings that she had that were
Wow.
undocumented. And so she would share her story as she did her research to draw in participants, and really was doing it in this responsible way. Like, this is what we plan to do with the results. Like, there was a lot of confidentiality, things
Yeah.
around like collecting narratives and data. And just the way she conducted herself, it was my first real experience in seeing someone really care. She was making sure that people's stories were heard and that it went somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's really where it started
And I
for
think
me.
that's so amazing because it also speaks about why it is important to have different points of view in the table, why it is important to have diversity, but not just have a different body or somebody who looks different from you sitting at the table, but actually listening and understanding their point of view, because this is one person, the only US citizen in her family, and she's taking into consideration the risks of doing research for undocumented people, but also merging the importance of doing the research, because if you don't do the research, you don't have the data to support your claims. But doing the research also exposes people to dangerous situations. And for me, that's the value of diversity, is that when you have somebody at the table, you have to listen to them, because they can give you the perspective of to make it work for everybody, not just for yourself. And I feel like in general, the United States, there's such a push for diversity, but we want to talk about people who look different, but not really listen to the people who look different and have different backgrounds and have different perspectives. And we're missing out on so much when we do that, because it doesn't serve you any purpose at all. The only purpose it serves you is just to have a pretty picture, and that's it. Because then you're not benefiting from the actual benefits of having a diverse point of view.
I think that it's purposeful that we, as people of color and other minorities, have been kept out of the research realm. Not having the data, right, that says that detention is harmful or deportations are harmful, then people get away with continuing to do harm. I don't know if you've seen that study. There's something that's called the weird problem in the sciences, which pretty much demonstrates that 97% of all research studies conducted nationwide are on white, educated, liberal populations who are college educated. So
Wow.
that like steers our data
Yeah.
so much. That's missing so many of our communities, right?
Yeah.
And as we know, right, data drives resources, data
Right.
drives policy. So if that's what we have leading, right, at the forefront of who has access to what and how we're doing things in this nation, well, then it's obvious why, the problems that we have continue to exist. So it's so critical to have not only our voices as researchers on the table, right, but also ensuring that those findings get to the right tables and into the right hands.
Absolutely.
And making sure that our communities are taken into account. And oftentimes it's us who have to be the ones to bring that perspective that's so vital and so violently left out. And you see that as the whole conversation we've been having, right, are all the barriers along the way.
Yeah.
What happens when you immigrate, and then when you're applying to college, and all the barriers that exist there. And then you see this weird problem in the sciences, all of it is connected, and we're purposely left out. And then the research that we do is said not rigorous.
Yeah.
So that all of that is coded language for you don't belong here, and there's a reason why we don't want you to be here, because if you expose the things that have been occurring and that are harmful, we can't continue this way.
I have definitely experienced something similar as well. And I don't know if that's also part of the culture of some groups in the United States, in which they shy away a little bit from acknowledging that something is wrong and that we have so much work to do to make it better. And that, for me, that was the biggest challenge when I started working in industry, because I'm used to saying this is wrong and we have to fix it. And in my culture, that's okay. And, we acknowledge that's a problem. Perhaps the problem in my culture is that we don't celebrate the things that we have done and the progress that we have made. And I understand why that is important too. But at the same time, we have to be able to name what's wrong and then to understand that we have to fix it, to make a plan to fix it. And when I would do that, at first I didn't notice, but then I realized that I was being penalized for naming it, for saying this is a problem, we have to fix it. And sadly, I realized that I need to adjust and be flexible in those types of situations, but I'm trying to find a way to still do it.
Yes. I think, we could really look to our Black Lives Matter movement to see how critical that is, right? I fully think that we've yet to see that movement, that cohesion, that collaboration within our Latinx immigrant community. Mm-hmm. They're naming stuff, the things that people have gotten away with in the day-to-day interactions, and then at this larger systemic level, that movement is saying, we are done, we are tired, we're going to call you out every step of the way. And I feel like that's so critical for us to be able to see a better future for our communities. We need to adopt some of that, and it's challenging and it's exhausting. It's hard work to do.
With this highlight for the need of diversity and inclusion in the scientific fields, we end the first part of this episode. Come back in 2 weeks to learn about how the Supreme Court could upend the lives of millions of undocumented people in the United States and what's at stake on the November 3rd presidential election. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, you can follow us on Instagram at LatinxCan. If you have questions or feedback for us, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you like this episode, please leave a review. It is the quickest way to grow as a community. Once again, thank you for listening, and remember, unidos somos más.